Hello, in this video we're going to take a look at how you can use your Android tablet to connect to the flight controller and make changes. Connecting can be either done directly through a cable or through Bluetooth wirelessly. And this is obviously a very, very convenient thing to be able to do when you're out in the flying field and you don't have your computer with you, or you just don't want to take your laptop with you if you have your laptop, and it's just kind of annoying to have to take that kind of stuff. But usually you'll have your phone with you, so this is a very, very handy thing to do. So let's have a look at how it can be done. So in order to do this, obviously you'll need to get an app for your device, and the app that I've been using to do this is this one called EasyGUI Ground Station, and this is probably the most popular one out there for doing this. You can see a few other ones along the side there, but I personally have not tried any of those other ones because I found this one does pretty much everything I need to do and then some. You can do, I think, almost anything you can do in the normal Betaflight configurator you can do on here. Plus then you can also do things like this mission planner stuff here. So yeah, I'm just going to look at this one only in this video. I've been using this for about a year and a half and it's worked great for me. I've had maybe just one little problem in that year and a half, nothing major. And as you can see from the reviews there, it's doing quite well in the store as well. So I'll put a link to this, or you can just search for EasyGUI in the Android Play Store and you should find it pretty easily. So to connect via a direct cable, you will need to have a device that is compatible or can support USB host mode, otherwise known as USB on the go. So that's this OTG here. And I'll also link in the description to this page on Android Stack Exchange where there's some discussion of how this works. This first answer is very good actually, so I'll just point you to this for most of what I'm about to just briefly brush over. But you'll need a special cable, and I think he mentioned somewhere that the cable has one of the pins inside the cable is connected to ground, which is a signal to the device that it should run in host mode instead of as a client or something like that. So you'll need a little cable like that, which I have, obviously, and yeah, you need a fairly recent operating system, and the device itself needs to have drivers as well. For me here, I have a Nexus 7 2013 version and a Samsung Galaxy S3, and they both work just fine. Previously I had a Galaxy S2 which did not support this, but for all the Samsung Galaxy line from S3 onwards, they should all be fine to do this. And here is one of those cables, and you'll see at one end it has a micro USB. In this case, I mean, depends, maybe if your device has one of those newer USB connectors you might need something different. And the other end is going to be like this. Is this female or male? I'm not sure technically which that is, but it's the type that's going to accept a typical USB device, for example like this flash drive. I can plug this into my phone, and in this case it is going to ask me when I start up which program I want to handle this device with on my phone. So I'm just going to disconnect that, but you can see there that it's recognized this as a disk, and it's opening up that File Explorer app to let me see what I can do. And another cool thing you can do is plug in a mouse. Is this going to work? Yeah, there we go. So now I have a mouse on my screen and I can do stuff like that. How do I go back? Anyway, I have a mouse here, see I'm doing this. Anyway, so that's what USB on the go does. It lets you make your phone or your device a host for USB devices. So we don't want to use a mouse or a flash drive, obviously. The USB device that we want to use with this is one of these, the flight controller. So let me just get that set up. Alright, so I have my USB plug in the flight controller there as normal, and this time it's going into this USB on the go cable, and I'm going to plug that into my Android tablet. Now for this particular flight controller, nothing happens immediately because just because of the way the positive voltage rails are wired up on the flight controller board, it's not going to take power from the tablet, unfortunately. Some flight controllers might just work straight away like that, but for this particular one that I'm using, I'm going to have to power it, so I'm just going to plug in a LiPo battery. Take your propellers off if you're going to do this. And now, oh, it still doesn't work. what have I done? I think maybe it needs to be powered up when I plug in, because it sort of detects when something's plugged in. So let me try that. Oh, it used to do this straight away, but now I think it doesn't do anything until you start the EasyGUI app. So there's my EasyGUI app there. No, hold on a minute.
Disconnected.
Let me try this again. There we go. Okay. Okay, so sorry, I was a little bit unprepared for this, but it looks like you have to have the app open and waiting when you plug in the USB connection there. So this time it's detected that this device is something that the EasyGUI app can handle, and you can set it to use this by default or to just use it for this time. And I'm going to go OK. And I'll just take one step back because there's one thing I probably should have done before. So I'm just going to take that out. Right up the top here there's a little 3 dots thing, and if you tap on there you'll see settings, and the connection type, you can see we've got Bluetooth and USB serial port. These are the two that I'm going to be looking at in this video, and I'm not sure what the default is actually, but I had this set to USB serial port, which is what you're going to need to do this direct USB on the go cable connection. And if you go next, there's another setting which is fairly important. You can select between Clean Flight or the older multi-Wii flight controller, but I think this will also default to Clean Flight these days. I'm not sure, but if it's not on Clean Flight, set this to Clean Flight, and if this is not on USB serial port, set it to USB serial port, and then do exit, so that when this connects, it should detect like it did before. Okay. Connected. It seems to repeat those phrases for some reason, but anyway, it works fine. So you can see I'm actually using a 2S battery there, and it's detected that just by looking at the voltage. It's the only cell number that makes sense for 7.5 volts, I guess. And we can see on here some data uploaded and downloaded, data quantities. Information will show us some basic info about what kind of a flight controller version we're running. So BTFL is Betaflight. Board type is a Afro Naze, I think that stands for. And there's a bunch of things there, just basic info. And we can, by the way, the guy who makes this makes an app that you can actually flash firmware onto the flight controller with. I have not tried that, but it's out there if you want to try that. So on this dashboard, one easy way to make sure that you are connected is by moving your quad around, and you can see the pitch and roll values should be moving in the same way that you move your quad. So anyway, by swiping this left and right, we can see a whole bunch of other things. So we have motors, and we can actually control the motors in the same way that we did on the Betaflight configurator. So I don't know if you can hear that, but so I'm actually turning the motors. Which motor am I turning there? Okay, so it looks like I'm turning motor 1. Not sure how I can select a different motor. Oh, there it is. Yeah, so if you just have a look around in here, you'll see, I think, almost everything that you can do in the Betaflight configurator except for OSD setup, perhaps. So now I'm doing motor 2. Yeah, that's kind of fun. Anyway, let's go back from there. Yeah, so what else is there? Yeah, so probably what you're going to be using this most for is PID tuning, and if I can just get this to focus. So that's on this third page under the PID button, and you can, for example, tap on one of those, change the number, say OK, and then do this, save to EEPROM, and confirm yes. And that will write new PID values to the flight controller. And some of this you can actually do while the quad is flying, if you're using Bluetooth, you can look at this data while the quad is flying. I think some of it may be restricted for doing updates while it's armed, but you can at least see the data, and it becomes quite useful with this GPS info. There's not going to be anything on here because I don't have a GPS on this quad, but when it comes to GPS enabled quads, this particular page here can be quite useful to look at to see how well the GPS is receiving satellites, and just to check that it's actually doing what it should properly. Yeah, so that's probably about all that we need to look at for this section. I think this is one that I had problems with actually. So yeah, I guess you can read that there. But this lets you set up some very fundamental things on the quad, which I would probably suggest not to do very often out in the field. This is probably the kind of thing that you would only set up once and then not touch again. Let me just shut those motors up. I can select all motors. That was just the BL heli making the motors beep because they hadn't been turned for a while. Yeah, so it's a really cool app, and I think I've just about looked at what I was going to look at. So just look through it, look at all these buttons and tabs, and another cool thing that you can do is calibrate the magnetometer, which we'll get to in another video series, I think. But yeah, it's a really cool app, and I highly recommend getting it. It's actually free to do most of the stuff. If all you want to do is PID tuning, that I think is free. And if you want to do some of the more advanced stuff like missions, like putting in waypoints for missions, that's going to cost you, but it's not too much. I think it's $4 or $5 if I remember correctly. So by all means, get the app and support this guy if you want to see more work done on this app in the future. Alright, so that's all for the cable connection. That's obviously very easy, nothing complicated about that. All you need to do is get one of these cables and then get that app. Now the Bluetooth, which we'll look at next, is going to require a little bit more complex setup, but the payoff is that it's much cooler. As I mentioned before, you can look at all this data while the quad is actually flying, and you don't need to even touch it to make any settings. So let's have a look at how the Bluetooth works. So obviously, in order to communicate with the quadcopter by Bluetooth, we'll need to have something on the quadcopter that can receive Bluetooth signals, and it's going to be this thing here. This is called a Bluetooth module, and this is a pretty common one, goes by the name HC05, and we have a bunch of connections on here. VCC and ground you should be very familiar with by now. In this case it's going to be 5 volts, so that's the same as our flight controller, very convenient. And then we have a TX and an RX, and this is TX is going to be transmitting information out from this module, and RX is going to be receiving information coming in. And then we have a couple more things. I'm not really sure what that LED one is for, but the key, by connecting the key to VCC when this module starts up, we can make it enter a different state where we can change some settings on the module. And specifically, we might need to change the communication speed that the module expects to communicate at. You could just get lucky and when it arrives it already works and you don't need to, but I'm going to go through the process of how to set it to a specific speed so that you can use it without any doubt or trouble. Now, as I mentioned, this key here, to enter that specific mode we need to connect key to VCC when it starts up. So it's kind of a pain in the butt. You have to sort of somehow like get a little wire and connect those two pins together when it starts up, which is very fiddly to do because you're going to have to do it while you're plugging it in. And I have this other module over here which is a little bit more convenient one because it has this little button on there, and if you hold that button down it's going to actually connect the key to VCC for you. So it's much easier to hold that button down while you plug it in. And if we look at the connections on the back, they are essentially the same but slightly different labeling. So we have VCC ground, TX and RX, and you can see the arrows there are just reminding you which way information is going on that particular pin. And then instead of key, this one is called enable, I think that stands for. So this one here should be with the button, yeah. So that button is going to be on that pin connecting it to VCC somehow under there that we can't quite see. But if you have the option to get one with the button, I'd say get the one with the button because it's a hell of a lot easier to use. So for the rest of this video, I'm going to use this one. And let me just quickly show you that. So it's looking at about $5 or so for one of these. And this, unfortunately, while we can connect this directly to our flight controller, we cannot connect it directly to our computer to change the settings if we need to change the settings. So if you're going to get one of these, you would also be well advised to get one of these things, which is a USB to serial adapter. So USB from your computer can come into this side, and then the serial connection is over here, which is what this RX and TX are on there. So where are we? So RX and TX is where the actual information is going to and from the, in this case, to the computer. So this adapter will let your computer talk to the Bluetooth module to change some settings. And this particular one, it has a jumper on there. You can see this pin. I can pull that off and change it. And that is to set it to either 5 volts or 3.3 volts. And I found that for every HC05 module that I've used so far, they're okay to be run on 5 volts or 3.3 volts, so it doesn't really matter for this one. And we can see down there labeled some pins, RX, TX, those are the same as we had on the Bluetooth module. And then we've got VCC and ground, so I'm only using 4. You don't need to use every pin along here. So ground and VCC, you really must get those the right way around. If you get those backwards, you are probably going to ruin this module. I did that once, and my friend did that once, and he told me about it, so don't do that. And then RX and TX. Now, as we saw before, RX is receiving information, TX is transmitting information. So the TX information coming out of here, on black in this case, should go into the RX of this one. So the black is coming into RX on that side. And then TX is outgoing on white, and then it's coming into the RX on this one. So basically the TX and the RX get swapped over at each end. Here's the Banggood listing for that serial adapter. I think most places that sell these kind of Bluetooth modules will probably be able to sell you one of these serial adapters too, so they're pretty cheap. You might as well get one if you're getting them at the same time. So when this is powered up from USB in this case, we should see that little light come on, and then as long as you got the ground and the VCC the right way, you should see something like this. So we have a little light flashing off and on, and it's flashing quite quickly, and this signifies that it's in pairing mode. So you should now be able to see on your tablet, if you look in the Bluetooth settings. Now I've already done this, so we can just focus, then we'll see a few of these already. Now unfortunately they're all called HC05. One has a hyphen, one is missing a hyphen for some reason. This is the default name of these modules when you get them, but I think what I'll do is I'll change the name of this one so that I can see what it is, and so we'll look at how you can change the name of these as well. But just for now, this first test, you should at least be able to just power it up and have your phone or your tablet detect that it exists. You can't actually do anything useful with it just like that. Now this pairing mode that it's in at the moment with this fast flashing, this is what we need when we want to connect to it with the tablet. But in order to change the settings on this Bluetooth module, we need to put it into another mode called AT command mode. And the way that we do that with this one is when it starts up, we want to have that button held down. And as I mentioned before, with this one, you're going to have to figure out a way to connect that key to the VCC while you start it up. So to turn it off, I'm just going to pull out this red wire, which is VCC, and then put those in properly. So I'm going to hold the button down while I plug VCC back in, and then I can let it go. And you'll see it's flashing much slower. I think it's about 2 seconds between switches on this one. So this means that we are in AT command mode, and now we can talk to this and change the settings on it for when it starts up normally next time. Now, to talk to it, we need to have some software on our computer that knows how to pass information through this thing into the Bluetooth module to tell it what to do. And probably the easiest way to do this is to get something called the Arduino IDE, which you can get from here by typing into Google Arduino IDE, and it'll probably take you straight to this page, and you can get this for Windows, Mac and Linux. So install that on your computer, and then when you run that, you'll be looking at something like this probably when it starts up. And then under the Tools menu, you'll see this section called Port, and it's not showing up very well there, but it's in white text for some reason. But one of the things that shows up here when you have this plugged in should be, if you're on Linux, it'll be something like dev tty USB 0 in this case, and I'll select that one. If you're on Windows, it's probably going to be COM something, like a COM5 or COM6 or something like that. And you can probably tell by, if you unplug it, I'm not sure if this is going to update immediately. Okay, it did. Hopefully this works the same on Windows too, but if you just unplug it and plug it in and see which one of them shows up and which one of them disappears when you unplug it. So now we've got this USB 0 there. And I've already selected it, and you can see which one I have currently selected in the bottom right corner of this window. Now to see what's going on in that thing there, I can click this thing here, serial monitor, or under here I can open this as well, serial monitor. And this opens up a little window where I can send some text directly to this and have it do something. Now I think to do this, you're probably going to find that it needs to be 38,400 baud, and you'll also need to have this selected here, both new line and carriage return. So make these two settings like that. If it doesn't work at that rate, this is the speed of communication, try some other rates. Probably the next most likely is 9600, but for this one I've found that it was 38,400. I think this is probably the default. Okay, so now as long as we are in this mode where we are... Oh, it's gone out of that mode. Lucky I checked. Alright, I'll have to get it back into that mode again. Hold on. Okay, so now we are in AT command mode, and I can type AT. Oh, AT. And now this is where a lot of people will probably find that it doesn't quite work for them. I practiced this before I started making the video, so I got everything right. But hopefully you'll see it says OK when you type AT in there. And if it does, then you are ready to go. If it does not, first thing to do would be to check on Google. Perhaps also make a comment on this video. Maybe somebody can help. Not necessarily me, always, but somebody, you know. And anyway, so let's look at what other commands we can do apart from just that plain old AT. There's some documentation here that I will put a link to in the description. And if we look down here, we have a whole lot of information about this module. So what we just did was this one here, command AT, response is OK, and there are no parameters. It's just sort of a command to check that it's responding. Oh, by the way, there's some information about here. Do we need to do that? No, I don't think we need to do that. Anyway, so we did AT OK. Another one we can do is AT version, and that will let us see that. Oh, can I paste? Oh yeah. And that will tell us something version. Should give us a response like that. You can see the expected response shown in this documentation. So what we wanted to do here was we wanted to set the speed that this module is going to communicate with the flight controller at. And that is something called UART. So if we come down here a bit, we should see something called UART. It was here just a moment ago. So we can check what the UART is by using this command with the question mark at the end of it. So like that, we should see something. Now, looks like I've already set this up to use 9600 baud, but I think when I got this module it might have been something different. So if you want to set it to 9600, I would recommend 9600 is the best value to use. You can set it by using this one with the equals sign. So you're going to do UART equals, and then the parameters here are baud parameter. Oops, parameter 1 is baud, parameter 2 is stop bits, parameter 3 is parity. And I would just do like what I've got here. 9600.00 has been working quite well for me. So I'm just going to put that in there like that, and gives me an OK. So everything's good to go. And if you, like, I didn't actually change anything there because it was already set to that. But if you change it and you want to make sure that your setting took effect, you can do this one with a question mark afterwards and just check that it changed to what you told it to change to. So this is the speed of the connection, and in Betaflight Configurator later on we're going to have to make a setting that matches this. So remember, this 9600 was what we set here. So a couple of other things that you can do while you're here. If you buy this module brand new, password should be 1234 by default, but just in case you have a module that you've been using for something else and you forgot what the password was, you can check the password by using this query. So it's 1234, I haven't changed it. And the other thing I wanted to do with this one was to change the name so that I can differentiate it from those other modules that I had. Now here's a point where I struck a problem. When I did this query here, it gave me no response. So that's what this final tab in my series of cheat sheet tabs is. And there's a question here saying basically what I just showed you. Some commands have no response, and basically the answer is that you just have to hold that button down while you're doing the command. So if I just put that away, so if I try this again while I'm holding that button, now it tells me the name is HC-05, and I can set the name by, I'm going to call this basic quad. Well, actually, I typically take these off the quadcopter once I've finished doing my PID tuning, and I use them on a different quadcopter, so naming it after the quadcopter that it's on is maybe not the best idea, but for this particular video I'm just going to call it basic quad. And for this command also you need to hold the button down. So now I get an OK, and let me just check that the name stuck. Okay, so now name has been set to basic quad, and we should be good to go. So I'm just going to disconnect this. Well, I mean, power it down. And then when I power it up again, we should be in the fast flashing state. And if I get rid of that stuff, you should see when I start up, or rather when I come here and I do search for, search for devices, you should see one of these change from HC05. Come on, focus. Pretty sure it should change. There we go. So now I know for sure that that one there is basic quad. So I know which one is which. You may not have that many to bother with doing this, but I thought I would do that and show you how to do it while I was at it. So this Bluetooth module now should be good to go. We have changed the name, which was not really necessary, but the important thing was that we changed the speed that it's going to communicate at. Now, as I said before, you may get lucky and find that it arrives, depending on which module you get. Some of them may perhaps be set to the right speed already, but since this thing only costs a few dollars, you might as well get this and make sure that you're going to be able to set it to the correct thing if you need to. And you also need some little bits of wire like that, of course, to connect them together. Speaking of connecting things together, the next thing to do is to put this onto your quadcopter somewhere, and I've been using this already, so I have these plugs poking out the back ready to go. And as I mentioned before, make sure you get the ground and the VCC the right way, because getting those backwards is not going to be pretty. There we go. Okay, so ground goes to ground, VCC goes to VCC, so that's the 5 volts from the flight controller, and then RX goes to TX on the flight controller, TX goes to RX on the flight controller. So the ground and the VCC on the flight controller, you should be familiar with where those are already. And in the case of this particular flight controller that I'm using, my RX and TX are on pins 5 and 6. So these are the receiver channel pins 5 and 6. Now this is going to differ a little bit on other flight controllers perhaps. So let's have a look at how we can figure out where these should be plugged into. So this is the board that I'm using at the moment, and as I mentioned, pins 5 and 6, so that's this one and that one, and they are marked soft serial 1 TX, soft serial 1 RX. So we also have soft serial 2 TX and RX there, and if we look over here we have UART 1 RX and TX on those pins. We also have UART2 TX there and UART2 RX there. So we have a bunch of RX and TXs all over the place, and we need to make sure we are using the correct ones. Now I could have used UART2 TX and RX here, but I'm using iBus as we saw in one of the previous videos, and for iBus I'm already using pin 4. The UART2 RX is already taken up, so I can't use that one. And on this particular flight controller, this UART1, this is being shared with the USB connection to the computer, so I can't use that one. So I need to use this thing called soft serial RX and TX. So I've got soft serial 1, soft serial 2. Now these soft serials are not enabled by default. They are a fairly slow connection because they are not a hardware serial connection. The flight controller CPU has to spend some of its time pretending to be a UART connection, and it slows things down a little bit, not to the point where you can't fly, fortunately, but it does take up a little bit of CPU time. And on these older flight controllers, this is the only way you can do it to get more UART or serial connections. If we have a look at some of these other boards, this is kind of the same thing. This is a where have we got here? So we've got RX and TX on there. We could use that, but again, I think this UART is connected to the USB, so actually we might not be able to use that one there. At least not at the same time as the USB. So we might be stuck again with using pins 5 and 6 on this one there. This one here, we can see we've got TX1, RX1, and there's a 2. And we could also use, oh no. Yeah, anyway, this is going to depend on which board you have, so you might have to, if you have something other than what I'm about to do. There's RX3 there. So this particular board has 3 hardware serial connections without even using software serial. So what is the software serial? Let's have a look at that. In the Betaflight configurator on the ports tab, if we have a look at what we have by default on this flight controller, at least, we have UART1 and UART2. So these are our 2 serial connections, and if we just have a look at that image before, that is this one here, UART1 RX-TX and UART2 RX and TX. So each one has 2 pins, and we have those 2 available. Now, as I mentioned, I hope I mentioned in one of the earlier videos, this UART1 here, don't mess with this. This is what is used to connect to this Betaflight configurator and make changes. If you screw with this, you might find you cannot connect to the flight controller to do settings anymore, and you'll have to reflash the firmware. So just don't touch UART1, don't touch it. And UART2, as I have done with this one, I've set that to serial RX, and I've switched this on, so this is what I'm using for my iBus, and that's why I said I can't use UART1, why I can't use UART2 for the Bluetooth module. And I'm kind of stuck because these are the only ones I have. So to connect, as I said, I'm connecting to pins 5 and 6 to do this, and they are soft serial 1, and well, the four pins there will be soft serial 1 and 2, and they're currently not active, but we need them to be active. So to do that, we go to the configuration tab, and somewhere fairly near the bottom of the page we'll have a section that says other features, and one of those other features is soft serial, and this says enable CPU based serial ports, and there's probably a little bit of a help there. Oh yeah, that is helpful, isn't it? Configure ports on the ports tab after enabling. So I'll turn that on and save and reboot, and then I'll go to the ports tab, and look at that, we've got soft serial 1. Why don't we have soft serial 2? That's interesting. I thought we were going to get 2 of them. Oh well. And it's actually it's remembered my setting from before by the looks of it, because when you start this by default it's probably going to be like that. So to set this up, we have to match up the speed with the speed that we set for the Bluetooth module, which, as I recommended before, we could set that to a fairly low speed like 9600. So that's the number that I set when I was making changes to the Bluetooth module before. So we turn this on to configuration, because we're going to be making configuration changes through this serial connection, and that's it. So turn it on, set the baud rate to whatever you set the baud rate on the Bluetooth module, and should be good to go, I think. So save and reboot, and then provided that you have your pins connected correctly, again, TX goes to RX, RX goes to TX. So pins 5 and 6, and just to double check that, or just to show you what I've got on here. So I've got my orange and yellow are RX on TX coming from the Bluetooth module, and on this particular flight controller they're going into those orange and yellow right about the center of the screen there, pins 5 and 6 along that row. So now, if everything's going according to plan, we should be able to connect a battery to power this up, and we'll see this pairing flashing, and provided I haven't forgotten something, this is the point where I always realize I've forgotten something, we can go to our Easy GUI app, and I'll need to change this from using USB to using Bluetooth, because I was using USB connection before. So I'll change that, and now I can either tap this connect button or I can connect there. And one other thing I'll show you in the settings while I was there, should have done that, let me go back here. There's this thing down here called Bluetooth device, and it's actually set to the last one that I'd used, I think, which doesn't, it looks like it's not the one that I want to connect to. But what we can do is select BT device, Bluetooth device, so we can specifically say which one we want to connect to. Now, if you've only ever used one of these HC05 modules, you're not going to have this problem, but I have, as you can see, I have 3 of them, so I got really messed up one time when I couldn't figure out why the hell it wouldn't connect. And the problem was that it was just trying to connect to one of the other ones, maybe this other one that I had used before or something like that. Anyway, so I'm going to specifically say I want to use basic quad, and that is the other reason that I named it basic quad, so that on this screen when I get to here I know which one it is that I want. So now I can set that to basic quad and exit. So now when I do connect, or connect up there,
connecting, connected.
There we go. So connecting connected, that's what we wanted to hear. It's a little bit slow to start up there, but you can see we've got the same info. If we go to dashboard, you should see when I tilt the quad around, we're getting all that information. So basically it's the same as, everything's functioning the same as when we had a physical cable between the quadcopter and the tablet, except that there's no cable. So it's a hell of a lot more convenient. and we can do all that other stuff, like I can fiddle around with the motors and stuff. Where are we? Motors. Oops, motors. Yeah, let's put all the motors on. There we go. So just to show that it's all connecting and stuff. So from this point on, there's nothing really more to discuss because we've looked at most of the functionality here. Actually, one thing I didn't look at that can be quite handy is the command line interface, and you can anything that's not specifically shown in the menus to use with a convenient buttons and stuff. It doesn't really matter, because if you know what commands to use in the command line interface, I'm just going to do dump to show all the information. See there, we've got this console kind of thing, and it's reading information across the wireless connection to show me all of the little details about the settings in the flight controller. It's a little bit slow. Oh, what happened there? Did it finish properly? Oh yeah, I think it did. Yeah, that looks right. And then you can set all of these as well. So even if the setting that you want to make is not specifically given, unfortunately it reboots when you exit that screen, that's fine. But even if there's not a special button on here for what you want to do, that command line interface will let you change basically any setting that you want to change on the quadcopter, as long as you know how to use the command line interface. So it's really, really handy thing to have. And as I said before, you don't need to be anywhere near the quadcopter. Well, actually, Bluetooth typically, you can rely on it up to about maybe 10-20 meters or so. I have actually had one of these modules with this tablet working up to about 50, maybe 60 meters away. So I was flying around quite happily, looking on the map here at where the quad was, and I thought that was pretty cool. So yeah, I think we're done. So yeah, if you have any questions, perhaps put them in the comments and see what happens. You could also ask the guy, Bart, he's pretty active on forums, on RC groups and so on, the guy who made this app, that is, and he'll probably answer your questions if you're having troubles with it, and offer him some suggestions for what you might like to see in future as well. But for me, for now, that's going to be the end of this video. Thank you for watching. I think this is going to be the end of this series now. This is all of the material that I wanted to cover. I have had a lot of requests to do GPS quad features, kind of how to set up stuff for iNav and so on. So that is what I'm going to do next. But this series about the basic quadcopter stuff is going to be like the first thing that you need to watch before going to that series. So now that you've watched this one, well, you're well on the way to building a GPS quad in the future if you want to as well. Anyway, that's all for now. Bye.